In the preface of The Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, Nathaniel Branden provides an overview of the central theme of the book, self-esteem, its importance, and its relevance in our daily lives. Branden argues that self-esteem is essential for our well-being and that it is the foundation for a successful and fulfilling life. He also emphasizes that self-esteem is not a gift or a talent but something that we can develop and nurture through our thoughts, beliefs, and actions. Branden points out that self-esteem influences how we think, feel, and behave, and it is the root of our motivation and decision-making. Moreover, he believes that self-esteem is not a static characteristic but a dynamic process that requires constant effort and attention. Therefore, the author stresses that everyone can benefit from developing their self-esteem and that this book aims to provide the tools and strategies to achieve that. Overall, the preface sets the stage for the rest of the book by introducing the concept of self-esteem, its importance, and its potential impact on our lives. It also highlights the author's approach to self-esteem as a process that can be developed and improved through deliberate practice and self-awareness. Part 1. Self-Esteem, Basic Principles. Chapter 1, Self-Esteem, the Immune System of Consciousness. In Chapter 1, Branden introduces the concept of self-esteem as the immune system of consciousness. He argues that just as the body has an immune system to protect it from physical threats, self-esteem acts as a psychological immune system to protect us from the emotional and psychological challenges of life. The author believes that self-esteem is not just a feel-good factor but a fundamental need for our psychological health and well-being. Moreover, Branden emphasizes that self-esteem is not a result of external factors but an internal evaluation of our worthiness and competence. Therefore, he suggests that we need to develop and maintain a positive sense of self through self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-respect. Chapter 2, The Meaning of Self-Esteem. In Chapter 2, Branden explores the meaning of self-esteem and how it relates to our sense of identity and purpose. He argues that self-esteem is the result of our ability to live up to our values and ideals, and it is closely tied to our sense of efficacy and personal power. Moreover, the author suggests that self-esteem is not just a subjective feeling but an objective evaluation of our ability to cope with life's challenges and pursue our goals. Branden also differentiates between healthy and unhealthy self-esteem and highlights the characteristics of each. He notes that healthy self-esteem is based on self-respect, self-confidence, and self-love, while unhealthy self-esteem stems from a need for external validation and approval. Overall, Chapter 2 lays the foundation for understanding the nature of self-esteem and its significance in our lives. Chapter 3, The Face of Self-Esteem. In Chapter 3, Branden examines the outward expressions of self-esteem and how they manifest in our behavior, emotions, and relationships. He suggests that self-esteem is reflected in our posture, eye contact, tone of voice, and other nonverbal cues that signal our self-confidence and self-respect. Moreover, the author notes that people with healthy self-esteem tend to be more assertive, resilient, and optimistic than those with low self-esteem. Branden also emphasizes the importance of self-expression as a means of enhancing self-esteem, and he suggests that creative endeavors, such as art, music, and writing, can be powerful tools for self-discovery and self-affirmation. Chapter 4, The Illusion of Self-Esteem. In Chapter 4, Branden discusses the illusion of self-esteem and how it can lead to a false sense of security and well-being. He argues that many people have a surface-level or counterfeit self-esteem that is based on external factors, such as status, wealth, or appearance, rather than internal qualities like character, integrity, and competence. Moreover, Branden suggests that this counterfeit self-esteem can be a source of anxiety, depression, and self-doubt because it is not based on genuine self-respect or self-acceptance. Therefore, he encourages readers to question their own motives and values to uncover any hidden contradictions or inconsistencies that may be undermining their self-esteem. The author also warns against the pitfalls of seeking validation and approval from others as a substitute for authentic self-esteem, emphasizing that true self-esteem comes from within. Before we continue, we would like to inform you that we release these summaries in audio format on Spotify before we release them on YouTube in video format, with subtitles. We have also created a goldmine of information which you can get exclusive access to by supporting us on Patreon. You get in-depth summaries plus scripts, usually twice the length of our YouTube content, a list of the top 20 key takeaways and exercises, summary requests, and more. Thank you for the support and don't forget to hit the like button. Part 2. Internal Sources of Self-Esteem. Chapter 5. The Focus on Action. In Chapter 5, Brandon emphasizes the importance of action as a means of building self-esteem. He suggests that self-esteem is not just a state of mind but a way of being in the world, and that action is the bridge between our intentions and our results. The author encourages readers to take responsibility for their choices and actions, and to set achievable goals that will enhance their sense of self-efficacy and accomplishment. Moreover, Brandon suggests that taking action is an effective way to overcome fear, doubt, and self-criticism, and that self-esteem grows when we stretch ourselves beyond our comfort zones. He also cautions against the dangers of inaction and procrastination, and urges readers to cultivate a bias towards action as a way of life. Chapter 6. The Practice of Living Consciously. In Chapter 6, Brandon discusses the importance of living consciously as a way of nurturing self-esteem. He suggests that living consciously means being aware of our thoughts, emotions, and actions, and taking responsibility for the choices we make. The author emphasizes the importance of self-awareness as a means of understanding our values, motives, and desires, and he suggests that mindfulness practices, such as meditation and journaling, can be helpful tools for developing this skill. Moreover, Brandon argues that living consciously requires a commitment to honesty, both with ourselves and with others, and that this can be a challenging but rewarding practice. Finally, the author suggests that living consciously means embracing change and growth as a natural part of life, and that self-esteem grows when we are willing to learn from our mistakes and adapt to new circumstances. Chapter 7. The Practice of Self-Acceptance. In Chapter 7, Brandon discusses the practice of self-acceptance as a means of developing self-esteem. He suggests that self-acceptance means acknowledging and embracing all aspects of ourselves, including our strengths, weaknesses, and imperfections. The author notes that self-acceptance is not the same as self-indulgence or complacency, and that it requires a willingness to take responsibility for our actions and work towards self-improvement. Moreover, Brandon emphasizes that self-acceptance is a crucial component of self-love and self-compassion, and that it allows us to approach ourselves with kindness and understanding. The author suggests that cultivating self-acceptance involves practicing self-observation and self-compassion, as well as challenging negative self-talk and self-criticism. Chapter 8. The Practice of Self-Responsibility. In Chapter 8, Brandon discusses the practice of self-responsibility as a means of building self-esteem. He argues that self-esteem requires a sense of personal agency and responsibility, and that taking responsibility for our choices and actions is the foundation of a self-respecting and self-reliant life. The author suggests that self-responsibility involves making choices that are consistent with our values and goals, and taking ownership of the consequences of those choices. Moreover, Brandon notes that self-responsibility is not just an individualistic value but a social one, and that it requires us to take responsibility for the impact of our actions on others. Finally, the author suggests that self-responsibility involves a willingness to learn from our mistakes and to take proactive steps to correct them, rather than blaming others or external circumstances. Chapter 9. The Practice of Self-Assertiveness. In Chapter 9, Brandon discusses the practice of self-assertiveness as a means of building self-esteem. He argues that self-assertiveness involves standing up for our values, needs, and beliefs in a way that is honest and respectful towards ourselves and others. The author suggests that self-assertiveness requires a willingness to take risks, to be vulnerable, and to confront discomfort and uncertainty. Moreover, Brandon emphasizes that self-assertiveness is not the same as aggression or domination, and that it requires a balance between self-advocacy and consideration for others. The author suggests that cultivating self-assertiveness involves developing a clear sense of our values and boundaries, and practicing effective communication skills, such as active listening and assertive speaking. Finally, Brandon notes that self-assertiveness is a key ingredient in healthy relationships, and that it allows us to develop mutually supportive and respectful connections with others. Chapter 10, The Practice of Living Purposefully. In Chapter 10, Brandon discusses the practice of living purposefully as a means of enhancing self-esteem. He argues that purpose provides direction, motivation, and meaning in life, and that it is essential for a sense of self-worth and fulfillment. The author suggests that living purposefully involves identifying our values, goals, and aspirations, and aligning our actions with them. Moreover, Brandon emphasizes that living purposefully requires a willingness to take responsibility for our lives and to pursue our dreams with dedication and persistence. The author notes that living purposefully does not necessarily mean pursuing grand or lofty goals, but rather finding a sense of purpose in whatever we do, whether it be our work, our relationships, or our personal interests. Finally, Brandon suggests that living purposefully involves a commitment to lifelong learning and growth, and that it allows us to experience a sense of joy and satisfaction in our lives. Chapter 11, The Practice of Personal Integrity. In Chapter 11, Brandon discusses the practice of personal integrity as a means of enhancing self-esteem. He suggests that personal integrity involves living in alignment with our values and principles, and being true to ourselves in thought, word, and action. The author argues that personal integrity is essential for a sense of self-respect and self-trust, and that it allows us to live with a clear conscience and a sense of purpose. Moreover, Brandon notes that personal integrity is a challenge because it requires us to make difficult choices and to take responsibility for the consequences of our actions. The author suggests that cultivating personal integrity involves practicing self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility, as well as developing the courage and discipline to act in accordance with our values. Finally, Brandon emphasizes that personal integrity is a lifelong practice that requires ongoing self-reflection and self-correction. Chapter 12, The Philosophy of Self-Esteem. In Chapter 12, Brandon presents his philosophy of self-esteem, which is based on the belief that self-esteem is a basic human need and a key element of human flourishing. He argues that self-esteem is not just an individualistic value but a social one, and that it is essential for building healthy relationships and creating a more compassionate and just society. The author suggests that the 6 pillars of self-esteem, self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, living purposefully, and personal integrity, provide a framework for developing and maintaining a positive sense of self. Moreover, Brandon notes that self-esteem is not a fixed state but a dynamic process that requires ongoing attention and effort. Finally, the author emphasizes that self-esteem is a journey, not a destination, and that it requires us to embrace the challenges and opportunities of life with courage, resilience, and a deep sense of self-worth. Part 3. External Influences, Self and Others. Chapter 13, Nurturing a Child's Self-Esteem. In Chapter 13, Brandon discusses the importance of nurturing children's self-esteem. He argues that children's sense of self-worth and self-confidence is shaped by the messages they receive from their parents, teachers, and peers, and that it is essential to provide them with an environment that fosters positive self-regard. The author suggests that nurturing children's self-esteem involves recognizing and acknowledging their strengths, encouraging their autonomy and independence, and providing them with opportunities to develop their skills and interests. Moreover, Brandon emphasizes that nurturing children's self-esteem requires a commitment to compassionate and empathic communication, as well as setting appropriate boundaries and expectations. The author notes that the practices of self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility are also relevant to children's development of self-esteem, and that it is important to provide them with the tools and support they need to cultivate these skills. Chapter 14, Self-Esteem in the Schools. In Chapter 14, Brandon discusses the importance of promoting self-esteem in the school environment. He argues that schools have a critical role to play in fostering children's sense of self-worth and confidence, and that it is essential to create an educational environment that supports their personal and social development. The author suggests that promoting self-esteem in schools involves creating a positive and supportive school culture, encouraging student autonomy and self-expression, and providing opportunities for meaningful learning and growth. Moreover, Brandon emphasizes that promoting self-esteem in schools requires a commitment to cultivating teacher-student relationships that are characterized by respect, empathy, and trust. The author notes that the practices of self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility are also relevant to promoting self-esteem in schools, and that it is important to provide students with the tools and support they need to cultivate these skills. Finally, Brandon emphasizes that promoting self-esteem in schools is not just a matter of individual benefit, but also has broader social benefits, such as reducing the incidence of bullying, violence, and other forms of social dysfunction. Chapter 15, Self-Esteem and Work. In Chapter 15, Brandon discusses the relationship between self-esteem and work. He argues that work plays a crucial role in human life, and that it is essential for building a sense of competence, achievement, and purpose. Moreover, Brandon suggests that work is a primary source of self-esteem for most people, and that it is important to find work that aligns with our values, interests, and talents. The author notes that the practices of self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility are also relevant to our work life, and that it is important to cultivate these skills in order to achieve a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in our work. Finally, Brandon emphasizes that work is not just a means of earning a living, but also a means of self-expression and personal growth, and that it is essential to approach work with a sense of passion, dedication, and integrity. Chapter 16, Self-Esteem and Psychotherapy. In Chapter 16, Brandon discusses the role of psychotherapy in enhancing self-esteem. He argues that psychotherapy can be a powerful tool for addressing psychological wounds and traumas, and that it can help individuals develop greater self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-responsibility. The author suggests that psychotherapy can help individuals to identify and challenge negative self-concepts, and to develop more positive and realistic views of themselves. Moreover, Brandon notes that psychotherapy can help individuals to develop greater self-assertiveness, personal integrity, and a sense of purpose in life. Finally, the author emphasizes that psychotherapy is not a magic bullet, and that it requires a commitment to self-exploration and personal growth on the part of the client. Brandon notes that the relationship between therapist and client is also crucial, and that it requires a sense of trust, empathy, and mutual respect. Chapter 17, Self-Esteem and Culture. In Chapter 17, Brandon discusses the relationship between self-esteem and culture. He argues that culture plays a crucial role in shaping our beliefs, values, and self-concepts, and that it is important to critically examine the cultural messages we receive and to develop a sense of personal identity that is grounded in our own values and goals. The author suggests that some cultures may be more supportive of self-esteem than others, and that it is important to seek out cultural influences that are positive and empowering. Moreover, Brandon notes that cultural diversity can be a source of enrichment and growth, and that it is important to approach other cultures with an open and curious mind. Finally, the author emphasizes that self-esteem is a universal human need, and that it transcends cultural differences and boundaries. Chapter 18, Conclusion, the Seventh Pillar of Self-Esteem. In the concluding chapter of the book, Nathaniel Brandon introduces the concept of the seventh pillar of self-esteem, which he calls personal sovereignty. He argues that personal sovereignty is the ultimate expression of self-esteem, and that it involves a sense of inner freedom, self-directedness, and self-determination. The author suggests that personal sovereignty is the result of cultivating the 6 pillars of self-esteem, and that it allows us to live with a sense of purpose, creativity, and joy. Moreover, Brandon notes that personal sovereignty is not just an individualistic value, but also has important social and political implications, such as promoting democracy, human rights, and social justice. Finally, the author emphasizes that personal sovereignty is not a fixed state but a lifelong journey, and that it requires ongoing self-reflection, self-correction, and a deep commitment to personal growth and development.